Great to see you, sir. So today you had an interesting day taking a look at some documents that the FBI had prior to you getting a look at them. Did you find anything particularly interesting about these documents that Hillary provided the FBI?
Yes, ma'am. Keep in mind, one notebook were the classified emails that she handled so negligently. The other notebook are the witness interviews, the summaries, what we call 302s. My number one takeaway, Megan, is there's no reason in the world you could not and should not be able to look at the same witness interviews that I had to go to Washington and look at in a classified setting. You and your viewers should be able to read summaries of these witness interviews. The second takeaway is a lot of the FBI's time and attention was spent debunking and refuting these fantastically false statements that Secretary Clinton made at the inception of this email story. And the third takeaway, remember, Director Comey said that he could not indict, did not have a realistic probability of a successful prosecution on the issue of intent. So I looked to see what witnesses were questioned on the issue of intent, including her. And I didn't see that many questions.
Let's go back to number two.
Issue.
Let's go back to the second point, which is how much time they had to spend debunking what you say were lies or falsehoods that she told. What do you mean by that?
Oh, even something as seemingly innocuous as us referring to Sidney Blumenthal as her advisor. Remember, she got really upset when we used that term. You'll never guess which term the FBI used when they described Sidney Blumenthal and his relationship to her. He was interviewed. I think you would find very interesting what Colin Powell had to say and juxtapose that with what Clinton supporters have said over the last 48 hours. You go back, the multiple devices, how many phones she had, the very reason she set it up. All of that proved to be fantastically
And I want
false.
to ask you this. So she also, of course, claimed that she never sent or received classified information. We now know that that's not true. I know you thought it might be interesting if the American people could see who sent some of the emails that she received with the classified information. What do you mean by that? Why would that be so interesting?
Well, right now, even Congress can't see the identities of them. They are so classified that even a congressman in a skiff with no telephone, no iPad, no notes, cannot even see who the author or the originator of that email string was. That is how classified that information was that she was handling on a non-secure server. So Sidney Blumenthal is one author. Of course, you know Cheryl Mills and Numa Abedin and Jake Sullivan, but there are even some originators that even members of Congress cannot see the identity of them because of the nature of the information.
But meanwhile, she was saying, I had no idea. No, what classified? No, I had no.
Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails, either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true. There were a small number of portion markings on, I think, 3 of the documents.
Secretary Clinton said, I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
There was classified material emailed.
That was Congressman Trey Gowdy, and that was back in July, that exchange, looking for clarification on what was found on Hillary Clinton's private email server and the emails that traversed it. Clinton is trying to move on from this issue, and it looked like she could do that. But over the past week or so, it has become increasingly clear that she cannot. She also tried to downplay this AP report that came out that claimed that half of her non-government meetings when she was Secretary of State were with people who had made donations, and sizable donations at that, to the Clinton Foundation.
I know there's a lot of smoke and there's no fire. This AP report, put it in context. It excludes nearly 2,000 meetings I had with world leaders, plus countless other meetings with U.S. government officials when I was Secretary of State. It looked at a small portion of my time.
House Oversight Committee member Trey Gowdy joins us now. Good morning, sir. Good to have you back on the program. She says it's smoke, but there is no fire here. Your thoughts?
No, it's arson. It's pyromania. It's not smoke. Even listening to her talk about the Clinton Foundation, I couldn't help but go back and remember the press conference she gave on her emails, Martha, where every single thing she said proved to be false. That's the interesting thing about credibility and believability. You can't just keep it in one compartment. when you are a habitual serial liar in this facet of life, it tends to make people not believe you in other facets of life. So when she's talking about the Clinton Foundation, I go back and remember her saying there's no classified information. I only use one device. I did it for convenience, all of which were proven to be false.
Yeah. Well, one of the big questions here, she said she separated out the personal emails. But one thing we don't have a definitive answer to is whether or not she considered foundation business to be personal. So did she dump all of the foundation-related emails with the yoga and the wedding plans?
Well, Martha, you just put your finger on the, not the $1 million question, the $100 million question. I'm sure she's going to have a press conference later this afternoon or whenever she has the next one. I hope somebody in your line of work will ask her, did you consider foundation emails to be personal or work-related? I have yet to see a single foundation email produced by the State Department that was sent by her. Yeah. So if she considered them to be personal, then we move into the facet where she and her lawyers had those emails deleted. And they didn't just push the delete button. They had them deleted where even God can't read them. They were using something called BleachBit. You don't use BleachBit for yoga emails or for bridesmaids emails. When you're using BleachBit, it is something you really do not want the world to see. So I hope someone in your line of work will ask her, did you consider foundation emails to be personal or work?
All right, the other area that I want to get into with you is this FBI interview, because every time we bring this up on this program, we get a lot of response from our viewers. People want to understand how she was able to testify. It was long awaited, this testimony, this moment when the FBI would get to sit down at a table and ask her directly the questions that they wanted the answers to, because we know that James Comey said, this isn't an inquiry, as she said. He said, this is an investigation. All right, so let's assume it's an investigation. You looked at the notes from the investigation, and what can you tell us about what you learned?
Well, I read every word of all of the witness interviews yesterday. And Martha, I'll tell you up front, there's no reason you should not be able to read a summary of that interview that I read yesterday. You and your viewers should be able to read everything that I read yesterday that related to the FBI investigation. There's no reason you should not. My takeaway was this. Remember, James Comey said she was not indicted because he didn't have sufficient evidence on the issue of intent. I didn't see any questions on the issue of intent. There's no question she handled them negligently or extremely carelessly. He said he didn't go forward with charges because she didn't have specific criminal intent. I didn't see any questions on that.
All right,
she said she did it for convenience, but I didn't see the follow-up questions in the interview I read.
All right, so James Comey was not in the room during this questioning, correct? That's your understanding?
Says he wasn't.
All right, so he says he wasn't in the room. Do we know how many FBI agents were in the room questioning her?
3 or 4, and there were some DOJ lawyers also in the room, and of course her lawyers were in the room.
All right, so as an attorney, if you wanted to ascertain whether or not anyone had intent to influence something or an action or someone, what kind of questions would you have asked? You say there were no questions that went to the issue of whether or not she had intent. What would you have asked?
Well, there are 2 ways to do it. One is circumstantial evidence. The other is direct evidence. The direct evidence would be, Madam Secretary, why did you set up this email server this way? Why did you not take a state.gov email address? And her response was, and it always has been, convenience. And then that's when you press and say, well, what could be more convenient than just doing a state.gov email address? The labyrinthine effort that you made to create this separate server, that's what's inconvenient. I would then ask, why did you delete emails that you kept for 1.5 years? Keep in mind, these personal emails, she didn't bother to delete them for 1.5 years. It was the fall of 2014, 1.5 years after she left the State Department, that she decided to start deleting emails. Why didn't you delete them the month you left? Why didn't you delete them 6 months after you left? And the other question they should have asked her is, Madam Secretary, why didn't you turn your emails over the day you left service?
Congressman, what do you think is the significance of the developments this week? First, the fact that Clinton had to turn her private server over to the FBI, and also the revelation that at least 2 of the emails on that private server had top secret information.
Well, Chris, I think it validates what we initially asked her to do in March, which is to turn her server over to a neutral, detached, independent arbiter. We suggested the Inspector General or a retired federal judge once it was determined that classified, in fact, more than classified, compartmented information was on that server. The FBI then had jurisdiction. So I wish she had done this in March. We would be further down the road, but she swore she would never turn the server over again, and I guess she didn't. It was taken. It wasn't turned over. It was taken.
Well, you talk about wanting a neutral, detached observer, and one of the questions I have for you is whether or not the FBI, in your mind, fits that bill. How much confidence do you have that the FBI, which is part of the Obama Justice Department, will conduct a thorough investigation, one, into whether Clinton mishandled classified information, and secondly, whether she turned over all of her work emails to the State Department, or whether perhaps that she deleted, destroyed, scrubbed some of those emails?
Well, I'm 100% confident in the first, and I'll tell you why, Chris. From 1994 to 2000, I worked for the Department of Justice under a president named Clinton. And I don't think I knew the political ideation of a single FBI agent. So I think they're the premier law enforcement agency in the world. I think that they are as apolitical as anything can be in this culture, and I think they're going to go wherever the facts take them. But that's with respect to classified information. The completeness or the wholeness of the record, I frankly don't think that's what the Bureau was looking into. That's what the Inspector General wanted to look into. And when the Bureau was through with the server, I hope they will turn that server over to the Inspector General so they can determine whether or not the record is full and complete.
Well, that raises the question, what if it turns out, and this is actually what Clinton and her lawyer have said, the server has been scrubbed clean, and any of those 30,000 emails that she destroyed that she said were about yoga lessons and Chelsea's wedding, what if they're not available? What does that tell you?
Well, I'll tell you what it tells you, Chris. I don't know whether you do yoga or not. I don't, so I don't have any yoga emails. But the greater steps that you take, clean something or delete something, that's a higher level of concealment. That's a higher level of consciousness of concealment. So your viewers have to ask themselves, to what lengths would they go to delete a yoga email? Would they call in forensic experts to triple wash a server so they could get rid of bridesmaids emails or yoga practice emails? Of course not. We hit the delete button and we forget about it. So the more energy she put into cleansing or wiping this server clean, I think your viewers should take or infer from that perhaps there was something on there she really didn't want us to see.
Congressman, I want to ask you a question that when I told folks that you were going to be on the show, they've asked me, why is all of this your business? What does this have to do with investigating what happened around Benghazi?
Well, probably not much of anything. It was just us that determined this unique email arrangement she had with herself. We have interviewed 36 witnesses. Not a single one of them is named Clinton. In fact, while I'm happy to be on your show, had she not had this email arrangement with herself, you wouldn't be talking to me this morning. So my focus is on the 4 murdered Americans in Benghazi. But before I can write the final definitive accounting of that, I have to make sure that the public record is complete. So all of this started with my desire to get her emails and the emails of her top aides. That's when we learned she had this unprecedented email arrangement with herself, and thanks to, frankly, some folks in your line of work who did some good journalistic investigation, and thanks in part, I guess, to my colleagues on the committee, we have determined that there's a lot more to her email story than just the completeness of the record. In terms of what I'm interested in, it is doing a good job for those 4 murdered Americans and their families. The classified information, the rest of it is in other people's jurisdiction, and I'm content with that.
Now, and you know this, Clinton says this is all politics, Republicans like yourself trying to hurt her presidential campaign. Here she is in Iowa this week.
I won't get down in the mud with them. I won't play politics with national security or dishonor the memory of those who we lost. I won't pretend that this is anything other than what it is, the same old partisan games we've seen so many times before.
Congressman Gowdy, same old partisan games?
Well, the Inspector General isn't partisan, neither one of them. In fact, they were nominated by President Obama and confirmed by Harry Reid-led Senate. The FBI is not partisan. I get that she's frustrated. Her poll numbers are tanking. Folks who never thought about getting into the race are getting in the race. But she need not blame House Republicans for having her own personal server, for exclusively using private email, for telling us the Sidney Blumenthal emails were unsolicited, and then we later find out that they were not, for telling us there was no classified information, then we later find out that there was, for telling us the public record was complete, and then we find 15 emails she never turned over to the State Department. I get that she's frustrated. Sometimes when people are frustrated, they look in the mirror and they engage in a little bit of self-reflection, and sometimes they lash out and blame non-existent right-wing conspiracies, and apparently she's chosen to do the latter.
Yeah, but let me ask you about the non-existent right-wing conspiracy. I want to show a clip from a video that House Speaker John Boehner, Republican House Speaker John Boehner, put out this week about your investigation.
If Hillary Clinton wants the Benghazi committee to finish their work, she could help them by turning over all of her emails sooner rather than later.
But we're not going away until we get it, because it's really important.
Congressman Gowdy, I got to say, it sure looks like a negative campaign commercial.
Well, I haven't seen it. I can tell you this, Chris. We have interviewed 36 witnesses. Not a single one of them has been named Clinton. She hasn't been called before the committee yet. Once she comes before the committee, I suspect people's interest in talking to me is going to dissipate down to being non-existent. We've gotten tens of thousands of pages from other executive branch entities that no other committee of Congress has gotten. So, again, I would just tell you this. Had it not been for this unusual email arrangement that she had with herself, you and I would not be talking this morning. You don't know the name of a single other person we've interviewed as a part of our committee. You haven't seen any of the documents that we've acquired from the executive branch entities. We're trying to run this investigation the way that serious investigations are run. But lo and behold, we find something that all 7 of those other committees that she claims looked into Benghazi never found. So we're going to follow the facts wherever they go, and if that impacts people's perception of her fitness to be commander-in-chief, so be it. I can just tell you this. For the first 3 public hearings, I never mentioned her name.
Well, let me ask you about this, because Clinton's lawyer says that she will testify before your committee on October 22nd, and I'm a little confused. Have you agreed to that date, and have you and the Clinton team agreed on the ground rules for that testimony?
We have agreed on the date, and the ground rules are simple. You're going to stay there until all of the questions are asked and answered with respect to Benghazi and Libya. And part of that is ensuring that the public record is whole and complete, which means we necessarily have to discuss your unusual email practices. But we're going to stay there until all of the questions. If she's going to insist, Chris, that she's only coming once, I'm going to insist that once be fully constructive, which is going to be there for a while.
I understand, and you've made it clear that the mishandling of the classified information is not part of the jurisdiction of your committee. But I want to ask you about something very interesting that Secretary of State John Kerry said this week. Take a look.
Do you think the Chinese and/or the Russians are reading your emails?
The answer is it is very likely. It is not without, outside the realm of possibility.
Question, Congressman, when the Inspector General for the Intelligence Committee says that on these private emails was information that came from satellite intercepts, imagery, or electronic surveillance, and you've got John Kerry saying it's very likely that foreign powers are reading his emails, does that raise the stakes here?
Absolutely. It was one of the most reckless decisions that have been made in public service in a long time. And the notion that she did this for convenience, I would just ask you, Chris, convenient for whom? Because it sure as hell hasn't turned out to be convenient for the American people or for our intelligence apparatus. It may have been convenient for her, but it hasn't been convenient for anyone else. I don't know who's accessed her email. I know that members of Congress have not, but I don't know who has.
Finally, as we have mentioned, Clinton's position in all this has evolved. First, she said that there was no classified information. Then she said there was no information that was classified at the time. Now she says there was no information that had been marked as classified at the time. And I know the State Department is checking into whether or not any aides, officials, advisors may have changed the marking on some of those to remove the classified designation. What do you think of the chances that one of her aides will take the fall for this and that will get Hillary Clinton off the hook?
Well, I don't know about getting someone off the hook. If you're talking about criminal exposure, I would leave that up to the Bureau. If you're talking about the court of public opinion, I don't think it ever works when the person in charge blames those under him or her. It's never worked in any position I've ever been in life. She's the Secretary of State. She's the top diplomat for the country, and either she knew or should have known what was being sent to her. So the notion that somebody under you is going to take the fall, metaphorically speaking, I think my fellow citizens would reject that. She wanted to be the Secretary of State. In fact, now she's auditioning for a job even more important than that. With that comes responsibility. And I think my fellow citizens, if that proves to be correct, that classified information was mishandled, I think they will apportion the culpability appropriately. Professor Gruber, what did you mean when you said they proposed it and that passed because the American people are too stupid to understand the difference?
When I said that, I was at a conference being glib and, quite frankly, trying to make myself seem smart by insulting others.
Are you offering the venue as a defense for saying it or for meaning it?
I'm offering it as a defense for using inappropriate and hurtful and inexcusable language to express.
Well, what did you mean by too stupid to understand the difference?
Congressman, I didn't mean anything by it.
Well, you said it. You had to admit it.
I was once again being glib and trying to make myself seem smarter by reflecting.
Well, what did you mean when you said it was a very basic exploitation of the lack of economic understanding of the American voter? What did you mean by that?
Once again, it's another example of my inexcusable arrogance in trying to insult others to make myself seem smarter.
Well, what did you mean when you said the American people don't care about the uninsured?
Once again, that was an overstatement of trying to conjecture on political topics in which I'm not an expert.
Well, you know what, Professor Gruber, I have listened to you all morning talk about your lack of political acumen and that you're not a politician, so therefore you don't know not to call people stupid. Most of the people watching this morning aren't politicians, and they don't call people stupid. And I can't help but note, Professor Gruber, and another one of your quotes, which I'll read to you, that was politically infeasible. You remember saying that?
Yes.
So you do like to factor in the politics from time to time, don't you? And also happen to know, Professor Gruber, that usually you insult the American voter, not the American public. So you do factor in politics, don't you?
I have tried a number of occasions, pretended that I know more about politics.
Do you think not being a politician is a defense? And is that your defense this morning? I mean, I know initially you said that you offered these comments at a conference. I think you meant conferences, plural, but you said conference when you went on a very obscure television show and initially apologized for what you said were inappropriate comments. And now today your defense is that you're not a politician. Is that the best you can come up with?
The best I come up with is to really just apologize for an inexcusable.
Well, but I want to know, I mean, the pervasiveness of your quotes is so much that it has to be more than that. It has to be more than just an episodic mistake that you made. Well, here, let me keep going. See if this helps you any. What did you mean when you said you wish that you had been able to be transparent, but you'd rather have the law than not?
Once again, it was my trying to conjecture about a political process in which I'm not an expert.
Well, what did you mean when you said it was written in a tortured way to make sure the CBO didn't score the mandate as a tax?
Once again, it was using inappropriate language to try to sound impressive about something to my colleagues.
You see a trend developing here, Professor Gruber?
I don't understand the question.
It's a lot of stupid quotes you've made. That's the trend.
A lot of inexcusable quotes.
Yeah. Right. And again, your defense is that you're not a politician. The lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. Well, what does a non-politician do in talking about political advantages?
A non-politician is talking about political advantages to try to make himself seem smarter by conjecturing about something he doesn't really know.
So you're a professor at MIT and you're worried about not looking smart enough?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you succeeded, if that was your goal. Now, I want to ask you, are you sorry? When did you realize that these comments were inappropriate? Because it took you about a year to apologize, so I'm trying to figure out if you realized sooner that they were inappropriate, or was it just the morning before you went on MSNBC that you realized that it was inappropriate? When did you realize that these comments are indefensible and inappropriate?
I honestly didn't remember making them.
You didn't remember calling your fellow citizens stupid, and you didn't remember saying that you're the only person who cares about the uninsured, that the rest of your fellow citizens don't give a damn about the uninsured? You don't remember saying that?
I don't, because they were really glib and thoughtless comments that I made.
Well, Professor Gruber, let me just tell you what it looks like from this vantage point, is that you thought that they were really pithy and really funny until the video showed up. And then even then, it took you a little while to apologize. And what I'm struggling with is whether your apology is because you said it or because you meant it. Which are you apologizing for? Because you said it or because you meant it?
I didn't mean it. I'm apologizing.
All of these quotes that I just read to you, you didn't mean a single one of them. Not a one.
What I said, Congressman, is that I was using glib, thoughtless, and really inexcusable language.
You used them a lot. You used them a lot, Professor Gruber, which tends to undercut the notion that you were sorry for an episodic misstatement. I just read to you about 10. You see why people might possibly think the apology is a little disingenuous? Maybe. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
If the gentleman yield me just 10 seconds. Following up on Mr. Gowdy, when you made these repeated comments, these glib, inappropriate comments in an intellectual community with lots of other like-minded people, did anybody come up to you and tell you that what you were saying was inappropriate?
Not that I can recall, no.
I guess what you said was popular in that community. We now go to the...
And I want to say this, too. I want to thank my friend Ced Richmond and Hakeem Jeffries and others who are working on this issue because they want a justice system that is colorblind. After all, it's represented by a woman wearing a blindfold, so let's go ahead and make it colorblind. And both of those guys have worked really, really hard and will continue to do so, because let me tell you what my goal is. My goal is for witnesses to feel comfortable cooperating. But here's my other goal, and I'm out of time, but I'm going to share it with you. I want us to get to the point where we lament the death, the murder of a black female like Nell Lindsay, just as much if it's at the hand of an abusive husband, which it was, as we would if it had been at the hand of a white cop. I'd like to get to the point where we're equally outraged at the loss of life, and I hope we can get there. With that, I would yield back. Well, let's analyze that for a second. Congress decided in its collective wisdom that if you possess X amount of a controlled substance, you are going to get X amount of time in prison. You may like mandatory minimums, you may not like them. This administration summarily dispensed with that law. So my question to you, again, is can the chief executive fail to enforce categories of law that are both permissive and mandatory?
Well, it is well established that the executive branch has prosecutorial discretion to decline enforcement.
And what are the limits of that prosecutorial discretion?
You know, very frankly, I'm not an expert on that.
Well, let me ask you this. Can the president, let's assume that a statute required you to show 2 pieces of identification to purchase a firearm. Can the chief executive knock that down to 1?
I guess I'd have to know a little bit more, but I would...
It's a very simple fact pattern. You have to show 2 forms of ID to possess or purchase a firearm. Can the chief executive, under his pardon authority or his prosecutorial discretion authority, knock that down to just 1 form of identification?
Well, I'm not aware of limits on the president's pardon authority.
So you would say he could?
Under the pardon authority, the president can pardon just about anyone. Not that he should. No.
Even before the act is committed?
That's the reason for...
Can he do it before the act is committed? That's my question.
I'm sorry?
Can he do it before the act is committed?
That's above my pay grade. I don't really know that.
If the president can fail to enforce immigration laws, can the president likewise fail to enforce election laws?
Whether the president can pardon someone before a prosecution is initiated or before an act?
Well, I think I know the answer to that question. My question was before the act was committed. He certainly can before the prosecution. My question is this: if you can dispense with immigration laws or marijuana laws or mandatory minimums, can you also dispense with election laws?
Again, I think we've gone over this ground many times.
Well, just humor me. Let's do it one more time. Can the president suspend election laws?
No.
Why not? If he can suspend mandatory minimum and immigration laws, why not election laws?
Because we live in a government of laws, and the president is bound to obey them and apply them.
Well, he's not applying the ACA, and he's not applying immigration laws, and he's not applying marijuana laws, and he's not applying mandatory minimums. What's the difference with election laws?
We have a disagreement as to whether, in fact, he is applying those laws.
Did
My
he?
view is that he is applying those laws.
Did Eric Holder instruct his prosecutors to no longer follow the mandatory minimums with respect to charging decisions?
This is an area where I really don't know nearly as much as you do, Congressman.
I'd find that shocking that anybody would not know more than I do on any topic. Who would you like? You want me to ask Professor Turley?
That my impression is that he's not exactly doing what you've just said.
Well, tell me how I'm wrong, because Eric Holder sent out a memo that we are no longer going to put in the indictment the drug amounts. Do you agree with me that Congress can pass mandatory minimums?
Constitutionally, yes.
Do you agree that Congress can pass statutory maximums?
Pardon me?
Can Congress also pass statutory maximums? In other words, you can't get more than 30 years for a crime.
Of course.
Can a president exceed a statutory maximum?
Can he extinguish, did you say?
No, can he exceed it?
Can he exceed it? Well, how would he do that? I mean, keep someone in prison beyond his prison term.
Well, if you can put them in prison for less time than Congress says is the law, can you also do it for more time than Congress says is the law?
It's really, it's not, this is kind of fruitless because it's an area that I really don't know.
Professor Turley, what are the limits of prosecutorial discretion? And if the president can suspend immigration laws, marijuana laws, why not election laws? The president was given different duties and powers. The president was given the duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is what does that mean to you, that the laws be faithfully executed? We know the president can veto a bill for any reason or no reason. We know the president can refuse to defend the constitutionality of a statute, even one that he signs into law. We know the president can issue pardons for violations of the very laws that we pass. And we know that the president has prosecutorial discretion as evidenced and used through his U.S. attorneys. Mr. Speaker, that is a lot of power. What are we to do when that amount of power is not enough? What are we to do when this president or any president decides to selectively enforce a portion of a law and ignore other portions of that law? What do we do, Mr. Speaker, regardless of motivation, when a president nullifies our vote by failing to faithfully execute the law? How do we explain waivers and exemptions and delays in a bill passed by Congress and affirmed by the United States Supreme Court? How do we explain away a refusal to enforce mandatory minimums that were passed by Congress and affirmed by the Supreme Court? And why pursue, Mr. Speaker, immigration reform if presidents can turn off the very provisions that we pass? You know, in the oath that brand new citizens take, it contains 6 different references to the law. If it's good enough for us to ask brand new citizens to affirm their devotion to the law, is it too much to ask that the president do the same? If a president If a president can change some laws, can he change all laws? Can he change election laws? Can he change discrimination laws? Are there any laws under your theory that he actually has to enforce? What is our recourse, Mr. Speaker? What is our remedy? Some would argue the framers gave us the power of the purse and the power of impeachment, but Mr. Speaker, those are punishments, those are not remedies. What is the remedy if we want the executive to enforce our work? This bill simply gives us standing when our votes are nullified. This bill allows us to petition the judicial branch for an order requiring the executive branch to faithfully execute the law. Mr. Speaker, we are not held in high public esteem right now. Maybe members of Congress would be respected more if we respected ourselves enough to require that when we pass something, it be treated as law. Maybe we would be more respected if we had a firmly rooted expectation that when we pass something as law, it be treated as law. Maybe we would be more respected if we put down party labels and a desire to keep or retain or acquire gavels and picked up the history, the tradition, and the honor of this, the people's house. Mr. Speaker, the House of Representatives does not exist to pass suggestions. We do not exist to pass ideas. We make law. And while you are free to stand and clap when any president comes into this hallowed chamber and promises to do it with or without you, I will never stand and clap when any president, no matter whether he's your party or mine, promises to make us a constitutional anomaly and an afterthought. We make law.
Expired.
The process, and I'll
Are you
share
opposed to us considering comprehensive?
in the order that you're doing it? Yes.
Okay.
That the
Because you
border needs to
prefer
be
that there
secured
needs to be
first,
border.
and then you can address that issue after.
All right. And that's a Republican position, Republican Party position, and you're a Republican, and I understand that. Let me ask you this question. Do you need automatic weapons to help you with border control?
We have in Arizona, through the chair,
If you could say yes or no, and then you could explain.
semi-automatic weapons.
Do you need automatic weapons?
We don't have to have automatic weapons, no.
Do you need mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles to help you patrol the border?
Not for the border, but for our SWAT team, yes.
Thank you. Do you need silencers in order to help you patrol the border?
For our SWAT team, that's a tactical move, but it's not necessarily targeted.
Why does
for
your SWAT
smuggling.
team need mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles?
Because, sir, through the chair, our county doesn't have the money to buy a SWAT vehicle.
Why do you need it in order to enforce border security? Why do you need a mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle?
And this is where.
Thank you. And do you need?
No, sir. Sheriff, you may answer the question. You cannot ask a question and then not allow the witness to answer it.
Mr.
Sheriff,
Chairman,
you
I
may
wanted a
answer.
yes or no answer. He answered the question, and I'm ready to move on.
Sheriff, have you
Now,
answered the
if someone-
question as completely as you would like to?
Mr. Chairman, I'm
The
ready
gentleman
to
is
move
not
on.
recognized. Sheriff, have you answered the question as completely as you would like to?
And this is where us in
Mr.
law
Chairman,
enforcement.
regular order, please. Regular order.
In law enforcement, we have 420,000 residents of my county, and we are the SWAT team.
Point of
all
information,
13
Mr.
law
Chairman.
enforcement agencies, and for high-risk warrants, barricade
Chairman.
situations, almost never have we used
Chairman.
an armored vehicle for anything to
Point
do
of order.
with illegal immigration, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Sheriff. The gentleman is out of time. If you have another question,
I have a point of order that I'd like to
state your
raise.
point of order.
Is it within the rules of this committee that the chairman can interrupt a legislator asking a question of a witness.
If that legislator is not
legislator's
allowing
time.
a witness to answer a question, you daggum right he can. Yes,
Well,
sir. The gentleman is out of
I
time.
take exception to the chairman's
The chair would now
abuse
recognize
of
the gentleman
authority
from Iowa,
as
Mr. King.
chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very much appreciate your gracious welcome. I want to put on my old hat for just a second. As a prosecutor, there are 10 things our forefathers thought enough about and thought were important enough to remind us of even shortly after our foundational document was ratified. And second on that list of things that they thought were important was the right of Americans to keep and bear arms. And they thought it was important then, and it's important now for at least 3 different reasons. Number one, the right to defend oneself or defend one's family or defend others who frankly are in need of self-defense is not a right that government gave you. It is a natural right, and no government can take it from you. Number two, there was and there is a need for the citizenry to be trained to handle weaponry. Number 3, our government is based on consent. The people consented to be governed in exchange for certain representations that were made to us. It is sort of akin to a social contract. And consent, both in theory and in actuality, can be withdrawn. Like with so many other conservative concepts, that 3-part tripartite analysis of the Second Amendment came from a guy named Scalia in the landmark Second Amendment case, D.C. versus Heller. And I don't know what your politics are, and frankly, your politics are none of my business. I can just tell you from my side, I'm a Republican. From my side, we have lost 5 out of the last 6 popular votes for president. 5 out of the last 6 times, our fellow citizens went into the ballot booth and pulled the curtain. They pushed the button more times than for my side than for the other side. So when you've lost 5 out of the last 6 anything, I think it is important to figure out how to persuade people that there are legal, constitutional, and practical underpinnings to our belief in the Second Amendment, but it is also important that we empower ourselves to confront the arguments made by those on the other side. So let's just start at the top. I do not need this president or any other law professor lecturing me on those who have been victimized by crime and violence. I saw it. I lived it. I experienced it. So when this president and others were working on their innocence projects, I was working on some guilty projects. And in every one of those cases, I had family members with me, along with law enforcement, who had been victimized by gun violence. So I don't need this president talking to me about having compassion for those who have been victimized. With freedom comes a corresponding responsibility. This is important because that responsibility is owed by you personally. I have a responsibility to exercise my freedom judiciously and appropriately with you. But collectively, what do we call that responsibility? This responsibility that we exercise our freedoms appropriately, what do we call that? We call it the law. Think about it. That's what the law is. We have codified that responsibility that we feel towards one another. So here, I want to ask you, how is this administration doing in the enforcement of current laws? You already know this. It's against the law currently for convicted felons to possess firearms or ammunition. So rather than register them to vote, why doesn't this administration actually prosecute those cases? Lying in the application for the purchase of a firearm, already against the law. How are they doing on the prosecution of that? Those that have been court-martialed, already against the law to possess a firearm. Those who have been adjudicated mentally ill so they do not know the difference between right and wrong. How are they doing in the prosecution of that category? Those addicted to controlled substances, already against the law for you to possess firearms or ammunition. How is this administration doing? They are clamoring for new laws, and they talk about gun control. And let me tell you, friends, this is to empower you to make the argument. There is gun control. There are controls over who can have guns, where you can have them, and what kind of guns you can have. And this administration is anemic in enforcing the current law. So they want to win. They want to win the debate on the Second Amendment. I want to win the war on crime. So I want to say this. I want you, and obviously you are, or you wouldn't be at this convention. I want you to continue to educate yourself and those around you on the legal, constitutional, and practical underpinnings of the Second Amendment. But I want us to collectively just agree that we will be damned if we are going to take lectures on compassion and the human toll of crime from an administration that advocates for sanctuary cities to protect convicted felons from deportation, and then those felons wind up killing daughters who are walking with their fathers on piers in San Francisco. You want more gun laws? Mr. President, I want you to enforce the ones that you already have, because I'm not interested in a sanctuary for Mr. Lopez. I'm interested in a sanctuary for the Kate Steinleys of the world. Thank you, and God bless you. God bless America.
This is a Fox News alert. A State Department briefing underway, responding to questions about ties with the Clinton Foundation. This as we learn of another crack in the dam for Hillary Clinton. Let's listen.
Evidence of the way the process works, and in that, any Secretary of State has aides who are getting emails or contacts by a broad range of individuals and organizations.
So as far as you're concerned, what these emails, like the ones that just were released today, don't show anything new? This is old news. You guys have already looked into this and decided that there wasn't any problem?
I mean, of course, we're always assessing new emails as they come in, so I don't want to make it look like we just disregarded this. I think that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Well, go ahead and finish.
No, I just said we'll always assess new emails as they come in, but
these aren't new emails.
I understand that.
But I mean, you guys, you're confident, or you know that the emails that were released today have been looked at by people whose job it is to look into these things and decide whether or not there was a violation or an appearance.
Yes, that is my understanding. Yes.
And nothing.
Again, I stand by what I just said, which is that there was no.
How do you address the inference? James, the inference that is left in Judicial Watch's statements on this, that meetings were granted to certain people who were also significant donors to or partners with the Clinton Foundation, and they leave the inference that people were getting meetings or getting consideration at a minimum for meetings because they were big donors to the foundation.
I mean, I guess I would just once again emphasize that there wasn't a single channel for access to the Secretary of State, then Secretary of State Clinton. And for senior aides in the department at that time to have, to have connections with the Clinton Foundation, which, by the way, was working on, for example, Haiti relief post-earthquake, pretty significant role in that, in fact, only speaks to the fact that, these were important people who had reason to convey information to the Secretary. There was nothing that we have seen that implied any kind of untoward relationship.
But my question goes really to the fund. I mean, it's clear in the American domestic political tradition, it is completely explicit. You pay X thousands of dollars and you get to go to a reception with the president. or a candidate for the presidency. And, you know, I've been at fundraisers standing on the outside of them where there are different levels of money you cough up, and that governs how much access you get, and whether you get a photo with them or not, and so on. And so the question I want you to address is, Judicial Watch is leaving this inference there that you pay to the foundation and you get to see the Secretary of State. Can you say, no, that's just not true, that's not how it works?
What I would say is that we have no clear sign that that was the case. We've seen no evidence that that was the case.
Thank you.
Yep, please, I'm sorry, James, go ahead.
That's all right. In a related vein, and I should say to Arshad that in fairness to Judicial Watch, I think their public relations people would be very displeased if the record were allowed to stand, suggesting that they had simply left such things to inference. They make it rather explicit how they feel about it.
I stand corrected.
Fox News has obtained and shared with your office roughly 180 pages of call logs from the office of Cheryl Mills, covering a 2-year period when she was Chief of Staff to Secretary Clinton. As you have seen, the individual who left the greatest number of messages for Ms. Mills in that period of time by an exponential order was Laura Graham, then the Chief Operating Officer for the Clinton Foundation, close to 150 in the 2-year time frame. As you know, this evidence arises at a time when many questions have been raised about whether the Clinton State Department, and specifically Ms. Mills, maintained an appropriate distance from the Clinton Foundation. Can you tell us why Ms. Graham and Ms. Mills were in such close and constant contact?
Well, a couple of things to say about this. First of all, just to step back and address what James is referring to, these are logs that were, in effect, spreadsheets that were maintained by who was then an assistant to Chief of Staff Cheryl Mills to track, as you can imagine, the large volume of incoming calls that she received about a range of issues. And these documents were released through the FOIA process, I think back in April. So it's no surprise, of course, as I just think I said to Arshad, that State Department officials are in contact with a range of outside individuals and organizations, including nonprofits, NGOs, and of course think tanks and others. And that's certainly true with Ms. Mills. I would also state, and again, I don't know if I'm inferring from your question. I wouldn't want to do that, but Secretary Clinton's ethics agreement at the time did not preclude other State Department officials from engaging with or having contact with the Clinton Foundation. So you're right. There are these, I guess, approximately 150 messages. I can't give you a readout of every one of those messages, or every one of those calls, rather, and in fact, how many of the calls were returned or connected. All I can say, and I would go back to, again, what I just said, explained to Arshad, is, I would note that the State Department at the time was, and certainly Cheryl Mills individually, was a coordinating hub for U.S. and international efforts to relief efforts in the wake of the 2011 Haiti earthquake. And as I said, Cheryl Mills personally led those efforts throughout her tenure here. And former President Clinton also played a role as a coordinator for relief efforts in his role as the U.S. Special Envoy, or UN Special Envoy for Haiti. Again, I don't want to speculate, but that could well be the reason why there were these calls, simply coordinating on what was one of the premier or most significant foreign relations issues of the time.
On one occasion, Ms. Graham left a message from Ms. Mills referencing, quote, "our boss," unquote. Did Ms. Graham and Ms. Mills have the same boss?
I can't speculate as to who they were referring to. I just don't know.
I didn't ask you to do that. I just asked, did they have the same boss?
They did not have the same boss. I can answer that.
With these call logs fresh in mind, can you still assure the American people that the Clinton State Department maintained at all points an appropriate distance from the Clinton Foundation?
Again, we have seen no evidence of any behavior, any relations with the Clinton Foundation that weren't completely above board. And in this case, it's likely that what they were dealing with during many of these calls was the immediate aftermath of the Haiti earthquake.
And finally, since we just touched on Ms. Abedin, some unrelated questions about her. The New York Post has been reporting on the presence of Huma Abedin for more than a decade on the masthead of an Islamic journal that published some fairly vile things, including blaming the U.S. for 9/11, and an article by Ms. Abedin's mother in which she wrote that the, quote, empowerment of women does more harm than benefit, unquote. When Ms. Abedin was cleared to work here in the Department of State, one of the 2 jobs she held down during her tenure here, was Ms. Abedin's association with this journal known to the secretary or to anyone else in this building?
James, I don't have an immediate answer for you on that. I haven't seen these reports, to be honest. What I would say is that we wouldn't normally talk about someone's clearance process, except to say that having gone through security clearance process and considering what the level of clearance she would have needed for the job that she held, I can assure you that she was, like any individual would be, fully vetted. But I can't speak to these specific allegations. I just don't.
The presence of a State Department employee or a prospective employee on the masthead of a journal that is published and disseminated would typically be the kind of thing that those who do the vetting.
All right, we want to bring in Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herod. She is live in Washington as we've been monitoring the State Department briefing today. Catherine, a lot of tough questions and a lot of hesitation from Mark Toner.
Well, that's right, Shannon. Really 3 major takeaways. One, we've got these newly released emails from Judicial Watch that relate to Clinton aide Huma Abedin. She has been the focus of a congressional investigation because she wore multiple hats when she was at the State Department, a State Department employee, also an employee for the Clinton Foundation, and then also this Clinton-aligned consulting group called Teneo. And the question is whether this has been a conflict of interest. So we got to some of that at the briefing. The second is about the Clinton Foundation and whether one could draw the conclusion that when the Crown Prince of Bahrain gives a $32 million donation to the Clinton Foundation, this really paved the way for an in-person meeting with Secretary of State Clinton. The State Department spokesman Mark Toner just said that they did not see evidence of that being the case, though. One has to wonder what evidence they would need to reach that conclusion at the State Department, because unfortunately, one of the things that we have seen in our ongoing reporting is that the State Department has not been sort of a neutral arbiter of the facts always when it comes to the Clinton emails and the foundation. They've really almost become her defender-in-chief in many respects.
All right, Catherine Herridge reporting live on what we are seeing out of the State Department now. We are going to get reaction now with Congressman Jason Chaffetz, who is joining us now in studio, chairman of the Oversight Committee. What do you make of these new revelations and the tough time that Toner is having in trying to answer these questions about unearthed emails we haven't seen before, emails suggesting that the access to the Secretary of State was through the Clinton Foundation, and by the way, allegations that she and the Clinton Foundation are denying?
Well, he can't definitively define something because he's left in the dark. And look, when this originally started, Hillary Clinton created this system and this relationship with herself, something that the Inspector General found so problematic that he referred the matter to the FBI for criminal investigation. And so he's left not being able to definitively defend her or tell the American people that the State Department assets, the assets of the United States of America, were not commingled with both the Clinton Foundation and who knows what else.
Okay, now to the issue of the FBI. You have authored a letter with Congressman Goodlatte of the Judiciary Committee asking and pointing out FBI Director James Comey's statements against Mrs. Clinton's statements and saying there are factual discrepancies and asking whether a perjury investigation will be initiated. You address that to the U.S. Attorney in D.C. Where's it going to go? Anywhere? Is it a waste of time, as supporters of Mrs. Clinton say? It's a witch hunt that wastes government time and resources.
It was pretty stunning that the FBI director came before the members of the House and said that during their year-long investigation of the lies and what was going on with Hillary Clinton's emails, that they never looked at Hillary Clinton's testimony under oath. I mean, that was pretty stunning. It's public record. You raise your right hand, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, but the FBI didn't look at that. So evidently they needed a permission slip from Congress, which we've now given them, and we expect them to follow up on that, because clearly what she said under oath and what she did are two totally different things. To me, that's lying and misleading to Congress.
Is there any sort of timeline on that, or when do you expect that you'll get a reply about whether
Sooner rather than later. What the FBI gave us on Tuesday was in a secret format down in the SCIF, the Secure Communication Facility there in the House of Representatives, are the 302s, the background information, but chock full of redactions. Even I, as the chairman of the Oversight Committee, there's so much classified information there, something that's so sensitive that I can't even look at it. I don't even have the high enough security clearance. At the same time, Hillary Clinton's still telling that everybody that, you know, there were no emails that I sent, no emails that I received that contain classified information.
Well, her camp keeps saying if the Justice Department's going to release it at all, they want it to go to everybody, including me, average person with no national security clearance. Would it be helpful? Are you saying that what they're producing is so redacted that it wouldn't really make sense to the average person?
It is terribly irresponsible for Hillary Clinton to suggest that everything should be released, because it puts people's lives in danger. She still doesn't get it. What we're asking the FBI in a letter today to do is create an unclassified version and then release that to the public. That, to me, it's available on the Freedom of Information Act. Let's go ahead and get that out there sooner rather than later. And if it's true that the Hillary Clinton campaign and she personally wants that information out there, then let's do it responsibly, not do it the way she wants to do it, which is just release everything. That puts people's lives in danger.
Well, some people question whether they really do want the full release. We'll see. I want to talk through at least a couple of these emails that are surfacing today. The Judicial Watch as a portion of their work. We have Doug Band, obviously a very close confidant of President Clinton, helped him form the Clinton Global Initiative connected to the Clinton Foundation, sending an email to Huma Abedin saying CP, meaning Crown Prince, we believe, of Bahrain, in tomorrow to Friday, asking to see her, good friend of ours. And then he asked to see HRC Thursday and Friday through normal channels. I asked, and she said she doesn't want to commit to anything. Longer that continues on there. Then Huma Abedin at some point responds and says, offering him tomorrow for a meeting with HRC. If you see, let him know. We have reached out through official channels. And apparently the story goes, when they reached out through official channels, they couldn't get to her. When they reached out through the Clinton Foundation channels, they could get to her, and that he'd made a very sizable commitment or donation.
Well, this has happened by the millions of dollars, and that begs the question, and I think it's a legitimate question. They've created this problem, the Clintons did, by having this entity, and now as James Rosen is reporting through the good work of Judicial Watch and others, that here are 150 messages left by the Clinton Foundation to the Chief of Staff, to Secretary Clinton. I mean, come on, it doesn't take but a third grader to add this up and say, wow, you give tens of millions of dollars through the foundation, then you get the access that you want. I think that's a legitimate question that even the State Department spokesperson, when given an opportunity, could not refute.
He had a tough time with it. But again, through her campaign and the official channels, they're saying there's nothing there, that there is no connection.
And she should have a press conference. She's been 261 days without a press conference. This is what happens when you have a candidate that just hides and doesn't answer questions. That's what happens, is you're left with more and more questions. She needs to have a press conference and let the media ask her.
We would love to. We have a lot of questions. We'd love to see that.
Yeah.
Chairman, good to see you.